"You're not invited to Christmas. There's no room," my son said. I smiled and just left. When they all gathered around the holiday table and turned on the TV, instead of Christmas movies, they saw me there. That day, I received 113 missed calls. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The cake box felt heavier than it should have as I stood at Raymond's front door. Store-bought chocolate frosting gleamed through the plastic window, perfect and artificial. I pressed the doorbell. Footsteps approached. The door swung open. "Dad?" Raymond's face tightened, still in his work shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened around his neck. "What are you doing here?" "I brought dessert." I held up the box, suddenly aware of how foolish this gesture seemed. "Thought I'd surprise you both." "Oh great, more sugar." Stephanie's voice carried from somewhere inside the house. "There goes our diet plan." Raymond stepped back but didn't invite me in. His jaw worked silently for a moment. "Dad, you can't just show up without warning. We have our own lives." The words hit harder than expected. I shifted the cake to one arm. "I just wanted to see you, son." "See me?" His voice cracked upward. "Or check up on me. Make sure I'm living according to your standards?" Heat rushed to my face. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Raymond moved into the living room, gesturing sharply. "Because you always want to control everything. When will this end?" I followed him inside, setting the cake on their coffee table. The house smelled like garlic and herbs. Their dinner interrupted. "Raymond, maybe we should talk more calmly." Stephanie appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in her hands. "No!" Raymond spun toward her, then back to me. "He needs to understand boundaries." The word hung between us like a wall. Boundaries. As if I were some intruder rather than his father. "I understand more than you think." My voice came out quieter than intended. Raymond paced to the window, back to the couch, anywhere but looking at me directly. His hands moved constantly, through his hair, adjusting his collar, picking up and setting down a magazine. "Do you? Do you really?" He stopped pacing. "Because showing up unannounced with cake feels exactly like when you showed up at my college dorm to check on my studies. Or when you called Lisa's parents to discuss our relationship." The accusations stacked up like building blocks, each one precise, carefully placed. My chest tightened. Those were different situations. Were they? Raymond's laugh held no humor. "You've been managing my life since I was 12. Career advice that felt like commands. Money that came with expectations. Phone calls checking if I'd followed through on your suggestions." Stephanie moved closer to her husband, a subtle shift in alliance. The kitchen timer beeped in the background, ignored. I stood there holding my winter coat, still buttoned. The cake sat untouched on their table, frosting catching the lamplight. Everything about this moment felt wrong. I was trying to help. "Help?" Raymond's voice rose again. "Help me be the son you wanted? Help me live the life you planned out?" The room grew smaller with each word, their furniture, their decorations, their life together. All of it suddenly felt foreign. I was the outsider here. "Maybe I should go." "Maybe you should." The finality in his tone settled over us. No anger now, just tired resignation. Stephanie touched his arm gently, her wedding ring catching the light. I picked up my coat from the chair where I'd set it. The cake remained on their table, abandoned. "Thank you for the dessert, Walter." Stephanie's voice held politeness, but no warmth. "We'll enjoy it later." Raymond said nothing. I walked to their front door, turned the handle, stepped into the cold December air. Behind me, the door closed with a soft click. No slam, no dramatic gesture. Just the quiet sound of a barrier falling into place. The snow had started while I was inside. Tiny flakes drifted down, landing on my shoulders as I walked toward my car parked at the curb. "Dad, wait." Raymond's voice caught me as I reached my car door. I turned back to see him standing on his front porch, arms crossed against the cold. "Just wait a minute." I hesitated, key in hand. The smart thing would be to drive away. But he was my son. "Come back inside. We should talk properly." The house felt different when I returned, warmer somehow, though nothing had changed. Raymond gestured toward the living room couch. I sat on the edge, coat still on. "Look, I didn't mean to explode like that." Raymond lowered himself into the armchair across from me. "But you have to understand, this can't keep happening. Son, I don't want to control anything. Just what? Like with my first girlfriend? Like with choosing college? The specific examples landed like punches. Sarah Mitchell, his high school sweetheart. I'd called her parents to discuss Raymond's grade slipping, and Northwestern versus State. I'd made the practical argument about engineering programs until he chose my preference. Those were important decisions. They were my decisions to make. Raymond leaned forward. Even the mistakes, especially the mistakes. Stephanie emerged from the kitchen carrying a cup of tea. She settled onto the couch arm beside Raymond, close enough to show unity. Walter, you understand? Raymond is a grown man. Her tone stayed carefully neutral, but the message was clear. He needs space to build his own life. I understand more than you think. But did I? The evidence mounted against me. Every phone call checking on his promotion timeline, every suggestion about their mortgage rate, every gift that came with implicit expectations. Remember when you co-signed my first apartment lease? Raymond's voice grew steadier now, more methodical. You insisted on reading the entire contract, questioning the landlord about maintenance policies, negotiating terms I hadn't asked you to negotiate. I was protecting your interests. You were taking over. He rubbed his forehead. Then there was the job interview coaching, the resume editing, the networking dinner where you introduced me to your contacts without asking if I wanted their help. Stephanie nodded along with each example. She'd heard these stories before, probably multiple times. They'd discussed my behavior, analyzed it together, reached conclusions I wasn't part of. Every kindness came with strings attached, Raymond continued. Every favor required updates, reports, explanations of how I was using your advice. The accusation stung because truth lived inside it. I had wanted updates, had expected gratitude, had assumed my experience gave me the right to guide his choices. Your mother never saw it that way. Mom balanced you out. Raymond's expression softened slightly. She knew when to let me fail. You never learned that lesson. Ellen, she would have handled tonight differently, would have asked permission before visiting, would have brought flowers instead of cake, would have listened more than she spoke. She's not here anymore to referee. Stephanie's comment came quietly, but it echoed in the room. The words hung between us. Not cruel, just factual. Ellen wasn't here to smooth my rough edges or translate my intentions into acceptable actions. I was operating alone now, making mistakes without her gentle corrections. I miss her too. I stood up slowly. But I won't apologize for caring about my son. Caring and controlling aren't the same thing. Raymond remained seated, looking up at me. Though you seem to think they are. Snow continued falling outside their window. The room felt smaller again, filled with years of accumulated grievances I hadn't realized were building. Maybe we need some time to think about this. Maybe we do. Stephanie set down her teacup. The sound seemed louder than necessary in the quiet room. I walked to their door for the second time that evening. This time, Raymond didn't follow me outside. This time, the silence felt permanent. The drive home took longer than usual. Snow slicked the roads, forcing careful speeds. I gripped the steering wheel and tried not to think about the cake still sitting on their coffee table, or the way Stephanie had spoken about Ellen, or the list of my failures Raymond had recited with such painful accuracy. The house greeted me with familiar silence. I hung my coat in the front closet next to Ellen's winter jacket that I still couldn't bring myself to donate. The sleeve brushed against my hand, wool that still held the faintest trace of her perfume. The kitchen felt too large for one person. I filled Ellen's favorite kettle, the blue ceramic one with the chipped handle she'd refused to replace. It has character, she used to say, like us. While water heated, I wandered into the living room. Snow continued falling outside, coating the backyard where Raymond used to build forts and practice baseball swings. The grandfather clock ticked its steady rhythm, marking time that seemed to move both too fast and too slow these days. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece. Raymond at 8, gap-toothed and grinning after losing his first tooth. Raymond at 16, awkward in his homecoming suit. Raymond at his college graduation. Ellen and me, flanking him with proud smiles. When had those smiles become so complicated? The kettle whistled. I prepared tea the way Ellen taught me. Loose leaves, proper steeping time, sugar cube dropped in with ceremony. She'd made tea every evening after dinner, a ritual that marked the day's end and the family's gathering. I carried the cup to her reading chair by the window. The cushion still held the impression of her shape, a gentle hollow where she'd spent thousands of evenings with her mysteries and biographies. Ellen always said, "Love should be shown, not proven," I murmured to the empty room. But what was the difference? When I'd called the college admissions office to ask about Raymond's application status, was that love or proof? When I'd researched salary ranges for his chosen field and shared my findings, was that caring or controlling? The snow outside reminded me of the Christmas Ellen got sick, 5 years ago now. Raymond had driven through a blizzard to reach the hospital, arriving with snow in his hair and panic in his eyes. We'd stood together in that sterile hallway, father and son, united by fear and love. When had we lost that unity? Ellen's voice echoed in memory. "Walter, you're trying too hard to be the perfect father. Sometimes the best help is knowing when not to help." I'd dismissed her advice then, focused on my engineering mindset that every problem had a solution. Every challenge required active intervention. If Raymond needed guidance, I provided it. If he faced decisions, I researched options. If he seemed to struggle, I stepped in. But Ellen understood something I'd missed. Raymond didn't always want solutions. Sometimes he wanted space to find his own answers, even if those answers led to mistakes I could have helped him avoid. The tea grew cold in my hands as I sat in Ellen's chair, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. The house felt enormous and empty, filled with memories of laughter and conversation that seemed impossibly distant now. My phone buzzed on the side table, a text message from Harold next door, asking if I needed anything from the store. Kind neighbors, good friends, people who checked on the widower living alone, but none of them were family. None of them filled the Raymond-shaped hole that tonight's conversation had widened. Outside, the snow transformed the familiar landscape into something new and strange. Tree branches bent under white weight. Cars disappeared beneath accumulating drifts. The world remade itself while I sat watching, holding a cold cup of tea and wondering how to repair something I'd broken without meaning to. Ellen would have known what to do. She always did. But Ellen wasn't here anymore to referee, as Stephanie had so bluntly observed. I was alone with my mistakes and my stubborn engineer's conviction that every problem had a solution, if you just approached it from the right angle. The clock chimed 10 times. Late enough for bed, though sleep seemed unlikely. My mind raced with Raymond's accusations, Stephanie's pointed comments, the weight of years' worth of accumulated resentment I'd been blind to. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the quiet house. Tomorrow would bring decisions about how to proceed, whether to give Raymond the space he demanded or find some other approach to bridging the gap between us. But tonight, I simply sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone on the nightstand and trying to remember the last time my son had called me just to talk, without agenda or obligation. I couldn't. Morning light crept through the bedroom curtains as my phone buzzed on the nightstand. 7 a.m. Raymond's contact photos stared back at me. A snapshot from last Christmas when things seemed simpler. My finger hovered over the call button. The doorbell rang downstairs, shattering the moment. I set the phone aside, pulled on my robe, and descended to find Harold Scott on my front porch with a concerned expression. "Morning, Walter. Noticed your lights were on early. Everything all right?" "Fine, Harold. Just couldn't sleep." He studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd delivered mail to troubled households for 30 years. "Coffee's on at my place if you want company." "Thanks, but I'm fine." The pattern established itself over the following days. Each morning, I'd wake with determination to call Raymond. Each morning, something would interrupt. Harold checking in, the mailman requiring a signature, my own pride freezing my fingers before they could complete the action. Tuesday brought obsessive cleaning. I scrubbed Ellen's favorite reading chair until the fabric nearly wore through, organized the basement storage room with engineer's precision, and polished every surface in the kitchen twice. By evening, the house gleamed like a museum exhibit. Wednesday, I tackled the Christmas decorations Ellen had carefully packed away last year. Each ornament emerged wrapped in tissue paper, labeled in her careful handwriting. Raymond's first Christmas marked a tiny wooden rocking horse. Our wedding year adorned a silver bell. I hung nothing. Thursday brought snow again, heavier this time. Through the living room window, I watched the Martinez family across the street hanging lights on their porch. Their children built a snowman, while parents laughed and took pictures. Normal family joy that seemed impossibly distant. Harold appeared at my door that evening with a casserole dish. Margaret made too much lasagna again. I accepted the offering, knowing it was charity disguised as neighborly excess. We sat in my kitchen while I heated portions for both of us. You know, Walter, Christmas is coming soon. Maybe it's time to make the first move. I'm afraid I'll just make things worse, Harold. And if you don't try, it will definitely get worse. His words carried the weight of experience. Harold had raised 3 sons, weathered divorces and reconciliations, understood family dynamics better than my engineering mind could calculate. Friday and Saturday blended together in a haze of unnecessary household projects. I reorganized Ellen's recipe box alphabetically, cleaned windows that were already spotless, and rearranged furniture that didn't need moving. The phone remained silent. Sunday morning found me sitting in Ellen's chair, holding our wedding photo. 38 years together, and she'd never let pride stand between her and the people she loved. She would have called Raymond the first day, would have apologized for interrupting their dinner, would have made everything right with patient conversation. But Ellen wasn't here to smooth my rough edges anymore. Monday morning, December 22nd, Harold caught me checking my mailbox for the 3rd time. Walter, you're going to wear a path in that driveway. Just expecting some mail. The only mail that matters is what you send, not what you receive. He paused, studying my face. That boy of yours probably misses you too. He made his position clear. People say things when they're angry. Doesn't mean they can't change their minds. Around 10 o'clock, I found myself at Sullivan's Bakery on Main Street. The warm scent of fresh bread and pastries reminded me of Saturday mornings, when Raymond was young, when we'd walk here together for Ellen's favorite apple turnovers. Walter Wright! Martha Sullivan beamed from behind the counter. Haven't seen you in weeks. How are you holding up? Getting by, Martha. I'd like your best apple pie, please. She selected one from the display case, the crust golden and perfect, Raymond's favorite since childhood. Special occasion? You could say that. By 4 o'clock, I was dressed in my best casual clothes. The navy sweater Ellen always said brought out my eyes, pressed khakis, freshly polished shoes. The pie sat in its box on my passenger seat as I drove the familiar route through our neighborhood. 10 minutes later, I stood at Raymond's front door, holding the offering and hoping this time would be different. I knocked gently, hoping this time would be different. Voices inside stopped mid-conversation. Footsteps approached the door, paused, then continued. The peephole darkened briefly before the lock turned. Dad? Raymond opened the door wider than last week, though surprise still creased his features. What brings you by? Son, I brought your favorite pie. I'd like to talk. He glanced back toward the kitchen where Stephanie was visible, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Some silent communication passed between them before he stepped aside. Come in, Dad. Stephanie, could you put the kettle on? Of course. How are things, Walter? The question held careful politeness, like handling fragile china. I followed them into their modern kitchen, with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. So different from the warm, worn surfaces of my own home. Everything's fine. How about you both? I set the pie box on their counter, noting the Christmas cards displayed on the windowsill. None bore my handwriting. We're keeping busy. Stephanie moved efficiently between cupboard and stove, her domain clearly defined. Work's been hectic before the holidays. Raymond gestured toward their small dining table tucked into the kitchen's corner. I sat carefully, removing my coat and hanging it over the chair back. The positioning felt vulnerable, my back to their living room, watching them move around their space while I remained stationary. How's the promotion process going? I asked Raymond, treading carefully on safe topics. Moving along, should hear something after New Year's. That's wonderful news. Stephanie filled the kettle with precise movements, selected cups from a cabinet with matching ceremony. Good china, I noticed, reserved for special occasions or unwelcome guests requiring formal treatment. And your accounting work, Stephanie? Busy season approaching? Tax season preparation, yes. Clients want everything organized before year-end. She arranged items on a tray with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. The domesticity felt choreographed, each movement calculated to maintain polite distance while appearing welcoming. Steam rose from the kettle within minutes. Stephanie prepared tea with the same precision she likely applied to financial statements. Measured amounts, proper steeping time, sugar cubes arranged in a small bowl. Your house looks wonderful, I offered, accepting the delicate cup. The renovations really opened up the space. Thank you. Raymond's response came easier now, some tension ebbing from his shoulders. Stephanie has great design sense. She smiled at the compliment, settling into the third chair with her own cup. The triangle felt more balanced now, less like an interrogation and more like an actual family gathering. We knocked out the wall between the kitchen and dining room last spring, Raymond continued, warming to the subject. Made everything feel larger. Smart choice. Good natural light in here. For 15 minutes, we maintained this careful dance. Work stories that revealed nothing personal, house improvements that stayed safely superficial, weather observations that filled silence without creating intimacy. The tea grew tepid in our cups as we navigated around the invisible boundaries Raymond had established. I found myself relaxing despite my caution. This felt like family again, like the visits Ellen and I used to make when Raymond first moved out. Stephanie refilled our cups without being asked. Raymond shared a mild complaint about his office's new computer system. I mentioned Harold's concern about his roof shingles. Normal conversation, safe territory. The apple pie remained unopened on the counter, but its presence felt acknowledged. A peace offering accepted if not yet consumed. Late afternoon winter light filtered through their windows, casting warm shadows across the table where 3 generations might have gathered under different circumstances. Dad, thanks for bringing the pie, Raymond said eventually. I know it's my favorite. I remembered. Stephanie checked the kitchen clock above their stove. We should think about dinner soon. The comment held no urgency, just marking time's passage. I interpreted it as permission to stay longer, maybe even an invitation to extend the visit. My chest felt lighter than it had in days. A comfortable silence settled over us. Raymond drummed his fingers softly against his cup's handle. Stephanie straightened papers stacked near the phone. I allowed myself to imagine future visits like this one, regular family dinners, holiday gatherings, the gradual rebuilding of what we'd damaged. The grandfather clock in their living room chimed once, marking 4:30. I took a deep breath, ready to mention Christmas. Son, I wanted to talk about Christmas. The words hung in the warm kitchen air like a question mark. Raymond's fingers stopped drumming against his cup. Stephanie's paper straightening ceased mid-motion. An exchange of glances passed between them, quick, meaningful, the kind of silent communication that comes from countless private conversations. Raymond's slight hesitation before speaking told me everything I needed to know about what those conversations had concluded. Dad, this year is complicated. We already invited Stephanie's parents. The explanation came carefully rehearsed, delivered with the tone of someone who'd practiced this moment. Stephanie nodded supportive agreement, her role clearly defined in their domestic alliance. They're flying in from Phoenix, she added, as if logistics made the decision inevitable rather than chosen. You understand? We have a small house. I glanced around their kitchen, noting the cozy dining nook, the modest living room visible beyond. Space that could accommodate 4 adults for a holiday meal, but apparently not 5. There's simply no room for you. Sorry. Raymond's final words landed with gentle finality. Not cruel, just matter of fact. A practical problem with a practical solution that excluded me entirely. The grandfather clock ticked in the living room. Steam rose from our forgotten teacups. Outside, winter darkness gathered around the windows of their warm, exclusive home. I smiled. The expression surprised them both. Stephanie's eyebrows raised slightly. Raymond leaned back in his chair, perhaps expecting argument or emotional pleading. I understand, and I did. Completely. The preference for in-laws over father. The careful coordination of their rejection. The polite language that couldn't disguise the essential cruelty of choosing strangers over family. Walter, you know how it is, Stephanie began, offering additional explanation I didn't need. I do. I stood carefully, placing my cup and saucer on their counter with steady hands. Thank you for the tea. Raymond remained seated, uncertainty flickering across his features. Perhaps he'd expected more resistance, more drama. His father's calm acceptance seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Dad, maybe next year we can... No need to explain further, son. Good evening. I collected my coat from the chair back, noting how my hands remained perfectly steady. No trembling, no fumbling with buttons or sleeves. The engineering discipline that had guided bridge construction and foundation planning now supported this careful exit. Stephanie walked me to their front door, playing the perfect hostess until the end. "Drive safely, Walter. The roads might be slippery." "Thank you," Raymond called from the kitchen. "Dad, we'll enjoy the pie." I paused at their threshold, hand on the door frame. Snow had begun falling again, tiny flakes catching the porch light like scattered confetti for a celebration I wouldn't attend. "I'm sure you will." The door closed behind me with a soft click. No slam, no dramatic gesture. Just the quiet sound of a family completing its circle by removing the excess piece. I walked to my car with measured steps, started the engine, and backed out of their driveway without looking at their kitchen window. The roads were indeed slippery, requiring careful attention to steering and speed. By the time I reached home, the snow was falling harder. I parked in my garage, hung my coat in the front closet, and made myself a simple dinner of soup and crackers. The evening news droned in the background while I ate, but I wasn't listening. My mind was working now. The engineer's brain that had solved structural problems and calculated load-bearing requirements was engaging with a new challenge. Raymond and Stephanie had made their choice. They'd drawn their boundary lines with careful precision. Time to draw some of my own. I hung my coat in the front closet with deliberate care, each movement controlled and precise. The house welcomed me with familiar silence, but tonight that silence felt different, purposeful. Ellen's desk waited in the corner of our living room, still organized exactly as she'd left it 5 years ago. I'd never had reason to disturb her careful system of drawers and files, but tonight I needed what she'd preserved there. The chair creaked softly as I settled into her space. Family photos faced me from the desktop. Raymond's graduation, our wedding anniversary, Christmas mornings when laughter filled these rooms, before boundaries became weapons. I opened the top drawer. Ellen's address book lay beneath a collection of fountain pens and letterhead stationery. Her handwriting guided me through alphabetized contacts until I found what I needed. Frank Hill, documentary filmmaker. Ellen had insisted we exchange information after meeting at a community fundraiser 3 years ago. "Interesting man," she'd said. "Knows how to tell stories that matter." The business card felt substantial between my fingers. Professional, credible. Frank's company specialized in human interest documentaries for local television stations. WMEA had aired several of his projects focusing on community values and personal narratives. Perfect. I dialed his number, checking the desk clock. 8:30 p.m., late enough to catch him at home, early enough to avoid seeming desperate. "Frank Hill speaking." "Frank, this is Walter Wright, Ellen's husband. We met at the hospital fundraiser." "Walter, haven't heard your voice in ages. How are you holding up since Ellen passed?" "Managing." "Frank, I have a proposal for an interesting project." A pause, then professional curiosity. "What kind of project?" "I want to make a documentary film about real family values." "Interesting. Tell me more." I'd rehearsed this carefully. The approach had to sound noble, educational, worthy of his professional attention. Too many people today talk about family values without understanding what they actually mean. I'd like to share a personal story that illustrates the difference between words and actions. Personal story usually makes the best documentary material. What's your angle? The perspective of an elderly parent trying to maintain family connections in modern times. The challenges, the disappointments, the reality behind holiday greeting cards. Frank's interest sharpened audibly. That could resonate with a lot of viewers, especially around the holidays. Are you thinking WMEA as the outlet? Exactly. Community programming, local perspective, something meaningful for Christmas Day viewing. Christmas Day? That's cutting it close for production timeline. I understand, but sometimes stories need to be told when they're most relevant. Another pause. I could hear him thinking, weighing the professional opportunity against the rush schedule. "Walter, this sounds compelling. Can you meet tomorrow morning? I'd like to hear more details and assess whether we can make this work on such short notice." "Absolutely. Where and when?" "WMEA studio, 9 o'clock. I'll arrange for equipment and a quiet space. We could potentially film the interview and have it edited for broadcast by Christmas Day if the story justifies the effort." "Thank you, Frank. This means more than you know." Looking forward to it. And Walter, I'm sorry about Ellen. She was a remarkable woman. Yes, she was. I hung up the phone and sat quietly in Ellen's chair, absorbing what I'd just set in motion. Tomorrow, Frank would help me create something powerful. Not revenge, education. A documentary about real family values that would help the community understand what respect and dignity actually looked like. The fountain pen felt familiar in my hand as I began taking notes on Ellen's stationery. Story structure, introduction to family values, concept, personal narrative development, climactic revelation of modern family dynamics, conclusion about authentic relationships versus superficial politeness. Timing was crucial. Christmas Day broadcasts would reach families gathered for holiday viewing. The message would resonate when people were thinking about their own family relationships, their own choices about inclusion and exclusion. I wrote steadily until 11 o'clock, organizing thoughts with the same systematic approach I'd use for engineering projects. Every successful structure required proper planning, careful execution, attention to detail. Ellen's handwriting looked back at me from the address book, reminding me of her wisdom about showing love through actions rather than words. Tomorrow's documentary would demonstrate exactly that principle. I set the alarm for 6 o'clock. Tomorrow, we would begin. The WMEA studio occupied a modest building on Elm Street, its parking lot empty except for Frank's sedan and my car. 6:30 a.m. found us unlocking doors and turning on equipment while most of the town still slept. "Coffee first," Frank announced, leading me through a maze of cameras and editing equipment to a small kitchen area. "Then we'll set up for your interview." The studio felt intimate rather than intimidating. Local television operations lacked the polished grandeur of network facilities, but Frank's familiarity with every switch and cable suggested professional competence despite the humble surroundings. "Tell me more about your story," he said, handing me a steaming mug. "Yesterday you mentioned family values and personal narrative. I need specifics to structure the interview properly." I'd prepared for this question throughout my sleepless night. The truth, carefully edited for maximum impact, without revealing my strategic purpose. "Frank, imagine an elderly parent who loses his spouse and tries to maintain connection with his adult child. Traditional approaches, visiting, bringing gifts, showing interest in their lives. But modern family dynamics create unexpected barriers. What kind of barriers? Boundaries, control issues. The adult child interprets parental care as manipulation, paternal interest as interference. The parent finds himself excluded from family celebrations, treated as an unwelcome intrusion rather than a beloved family member. Frank's expression grew thoughtful. "That's a story many families could relate to, unfortunately. How personal are you willing to get on camera?" "As personal as necessary to help other families avoid similar mistakes." We spent the next hour discussing camera angles and interview techniques. Frank positioned equipment to create an intimate conversation atmosphere, soft lighting, comfortable chair, neutral background that wouldn't distract from the emotional content. "The key is talking like you're addressing a neighbor," Frank explained, adjusting the camera height. "Forget about the equipment. Just tell your story, honestly." At 9 o'clock precisely, we began filming. "Family values aren't words, they're actions," I said, looking directly into the camera lens. "They're demonstrated through respect, kindness, and inclusion. Real family values mean making room at your table, not excuses about why there isn't space." Frank encouraged me, with gentle nods, professional skill, drawing out emotional details, without pushing too hard. I spoke about the importance of honoring elderly parents, about the difference between healthy independence and cruel rejection, about Christmas traditions that should unite rather than divide families. "Tell me about a specific situation," Frank prompted during our second hour, "something that illustrates what you mean about modern family dynamics." This was the moment I'd prepared for, the personal revelation that would transform abstract concepts into compelling human drama. "Imagine bringing your son's favorite pie to his home, hoping to reconcile after a misunderstanding. You sit at his kitchen table, drinking tea, believing you're rebuilding your relationship. Then you mention Christmas dinner, expecting an invitation to join your family for the holiday." I paused, letting anticipation build. "Instead, you're told there's no room for you. Your son and daughter-in-law have already invited her parents. Small house, you understand. Simply no space for the man who raised him, who sacrificed for his education, who loved him unconditionally for 36 years. Frank's camera captured every nuance of emotion crossing my face. Professional instinct told him this was the story's heart, the moment that would resonate with viewers and justify Christmas Day programming. "How did that make you feel?" he asked quietly. Invisible, disposable, like 36 years of fatherhood could be erased by a single conversation about dining room capacity. We continued filming for another hour, exploring themes of family responsibility, generational respect, and the difference between independence and abandonment. Frank's questions guided me through a complete narrative arc, without ever making the interview feel exploitative. At noon, we reviewed the raw footage, 3 hours of conversation condensed into powerful emotional moments that told a universal story through personal experience. "Walter, this is exceptional material," Frank said, adjusting playback controls. "Michael Davis will want to see this immediately." Michael Davis, WMEA's program director, arrived within an hour. A man in his 50s with the harried efficiency of someone managing community television on a shoestring budget, he settled into the editing room to watch Frank's preliminary cut. 30 minutes later, he emerged with tears in his eyes. "This film is truly moving. We'll show it instead of the cooking program scheduled for Christmas evening. 7 o'clock slot, prime family viewing time." "Thank you," I said simply. "This means a lot." Frank spent the remainder of Christmas Eve editing our interview into broadcast-ready format. Professional touches, title graphics, background music, smooth transitions transformed my personal story into compelling television. By 5 o'clock Christmas Eve, everything was ready. Frank shook my hand outside the studio as snow began falling across Meadowbrook's quiet streets. "Walter, you've created something important here. I hope it helps other families communicate better." "I'm sure it will." Christmas Day dawned cold and clear. By evening, everything would change. I spent the day quietly, avoiding the festive chaos that occupied other households throughout Meadowbrook. Simple breakfast, brief walk around the neighborhood to observe families preparing for celebration, early dinner of leftover soup while other families gathered around elaborate tables. At 6 o'clock, I positioned myself in Ellen's chair with the television remote and a cup of tea. 1 hour until broadcast. 1 hour until Raymond and Stephanie discovered the consequences of their Christmas rejection. Across town, I knew they were hosting Stephanie's parents for the holiday dinner I'd been deemed unworthy to attend. Traditional Christmas chaos. Multiple generations, competing conversations, the warm family atmosphere I'd been excluded from experiencing. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times. WMEA's evening programming began with station identification and a brief announcement about special holiday content. Then Frank's professional introduction appeared on screen. Tonight, a local father shares his perspective on family values and holiday traditions in modern times. My face filled the television screen, sitting in the studio chair where I'd recorded my story just 2 days earlier. The lighting Frank had chosen created an atmosphere of dignity and calm authority. An elderly man sharing hard-earned wisdom rather than airing personal grievances. "Family values aren't words, they're actions," my televised voice began. 10 miles away, Raymond's dining room erupted in confusion. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Stephanie's parents, Rachel and David Lopez, visiting from Phoenix for the holidays. Christmas dinner winding down, television providing background entertainment while they digested traditional holiday meal and planned evening activities. Someone would notice the familiar voice first. Perhaps Raymond himself, looking up from his coffee to see his father's face broadcast into their living room. The moment of confusion. Surely this couldn't be happening. "When your own son says you're not invited to Christmas dinner," my television voice continued, describing the exact scenario Raymond and Stephanie had orchestrated 3 days earlier. That's my father." Raymond's voice would carry shock and growing panic. Stephanie would leap from her chair, desperately reaching for the remote control. "Turn it off, quickly!" But Rachel Lopez, a woman in her late 50s who understood family dynamics and generational respect, would already be processing what she was witnessing. Her daughter and son-in-law excluding an elderly father from Christmas celebration. Her own presence at this dinner table suddenly taking on uncomfortable significance. "Who is that man? What is he saying? Rachel would demand, her voice sharp with disapproval. The television, Walter continued speaking, describing the pain of parental rejection with quiet dignity that made Raymond and Stephanie's behavior appear increasingly cruel. Frank's editing had chosen the most powerful emotional moments, creating a narrative that presented my perspective with devastating effectiveness. Stephanie would be frantically trying to explain, to provide context that might justify their decision. "He's controlling, Mother. You don't understand the history." But the television, Walter anticipated such defenses. Sometimes, adult children mistake parental care for control, family concern for manipulation. They create boundaries that become walls, independence that becomes isolation. David Lopez, Rachel's husband, would be studying his son-in-law with new perspective. What kind of man excludes his elderly father from Christmas dinner? What kind of family dynamic allows such cruelty? "Make room at your table, not excuses about why there isn't space," the television, Walter concluded. The documentary ended at 7:30, leaving Raymond's household in complete disarray. Christmas dinner destroyed, family relationships suddenly complicated by public exposure of private shame. My phone rang at 7:35. The first of many calls that would continue throughout the evening as Meadowbrook's community processed what they had witnessed. Harold Scott's voice carried amazement and approval. "Walter, I just watched your program. Powerful stuff. That took courage." "Thank you, Harold. How are you feeling?" I settled deeper into Ellen's chair, completely calm, despite the magnitude of what I'd just unleashed. "Justice served, Harold. Finally, justice served." The phone rang again immediately. Christmas Day in Meadowbrook would be remembered for more than family gatherings and gift exchanges. Tonight, my story had reached every household with television, every family considering their own dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. Raymond and Stephanie were learning that actions have consequences. Public rejection deserved public response. The engineering was complete. The structure was sound. Now we would see how well it performed under pressure. The phone rang again immediately. Christmas Day in Meadowbrook would be remembered for more than family gatherings and gift exchanges. Tonight, my story had reached every household with television, every family considering their own dynamics of inclusion and exclusion. Raymond and Stephanie were learning that actions have consequences. Public rejection deserved public response. The engineering was complete. The structure was sound. Now we would see how well it performed under pressure. I glanced at the phone screen lighting up beside my chair. Raymond's name appeared again. Third call in 2 minutes. I set the device face down and returned to my book. Ellen's reading lamp cast warm light across the pages while snow continued falling outside. The grandfather clock marked time with steady precision. 8:15, 8:30, 8:45. Each chime accompanied by the silent flash of my phone screen. By 9 o'clock, I'd counted 37 missed calls. The irony wasn't lost on me. For weeks, I'd hoped Raymond would call. Now he couldn't stop calling, and I had no interest in answering. Text messages began accumulating alongside the calls. I glimpsed fragments when the screen illuminated, "Dad, this is unacceptable," and "We need to talk immediately." The desperation bled through digital communication like watercolor on wet paper. Frank called at 9:15. This conversation I accepted. "Walter, this is a masterpiece. The whole town is talking about the film." "Thank you, Frank. I'm grateful for your professional work." "Professional nothing. This is personal storytelling at its finest." Michael's phone has been ringing all evening, viewers calling to express appreciation, asking when it will air again. Will it air again? Twice more. Contract stipulates 3 broadcasts over 10 days, January 1st and 5th. I smiled into the quiet house. 3 opportunities for the community to absorb my message. 3 chances for Raymond and Stephanie to face their neighbor's judgment. "Walter, how are you holding up with all this attention?" "Peacefully, Frank, very peacefully." The phone displayed 67 missed calls when Frank and I finished talking. I made fresh tea using Ellen's favorite cup, the delicate porcelain one, with tiny roses painted around the rim. She'd used it for special occasions and quiet contemplations. Tonight qualified as both. Mary Henderson from across the street called at 10 o'clock. Her voice carried warmth and solidarity. "Walter, thank you for such an honest film. My daughter excluded us from Thanksgiving 2 years ago." "Not enough room," she said. I understand exactly how you felt. Thank you, Mary. That means more than you know. Stand your ground, Walter. Some things need to be said publicly. The call counter reached 89 by 10:30. I wondered if Raymond and Stephanie were taking turns dialing, or if they'd recruited help from the Lopez family. Perhaps Rachel and David were witnessing their daughter's desperation firsthand, watching their Christmas hosts transform into frantic damage control specialists. The voicemail notification appeared around 10:45. Mailbox full, the screen announced. 113 missed calls had overwhelmed the system's capacity. I finished my tea and closed the book, marking my place with Ellen's old bookmark, a pressed flower from our wedding bouquet that she'd preserved between laminated plastic. 38 years of marriage, and she'd never needed to make a public statement about respect and dignity. Her quiet wisdom had prevented such extremes. But Ellen wasn't here to mediate anymore. Tonight's consequences flowed directly from choices Raymond and Stephanie had made without considering their father's feelings or their community's values. The phone buzzed once more as I prepared for bed. A text message from an unknown number. Mr. Wright, your story moved our entire family to tears. Thank you for reminding us what real family values look like. I turned off the living room lights and carried my silent phone upstairs. Tomorrow, they would try a different approach, legal threats perhaps, or appeals to mutual friends. But tonight belonged to justice served with dignity and professional competence. Ellen's side of the bed remained empty, as it had for 5 years. But tonight, I felt her approval settling over the quiet house like fresh snow, covering old wounds. 113 missed calls. A personal record I had no intention of returning. Tomorrow, they would try a different approach. Frank called at 9 a.m. sharp, his voice carrying both amusement and concern. Walter, they're trying everything. Raymond and Stephanie showed up at the law office on Market Street yesterday morning, demanding to speak with someone about your broadcast. I poured coffee into my morning mug, settling into the kitchen chair where I'd eaten countless breakfasts with Ellen. What did they learn? Nothing helpful. Jim Morrison told them the documentary falls under protected speech. First Amendment coverage is airtight, especially since you never mentioned their name specifically. And the television station? That's where it gets interesting. They stormed into WMEA around noon, demanding Michael cancel future broadcasts. Made quite a scene, from what I heard. The coffee tasted particularly satisfying this morning. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, despite the previous evening's communication avalanche. Michael's response? Professional but firm. Contract legally binds the station to 3 broadcasts. Besides, he believes in the documentary's community value. Frank paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. Walter, there's more. Stephanie's been active on social media, trying to control the narrative. Posted a long explanation about family privacy and manipulation. It's not going well for her. How so? Community pushback. People defending your character, sharing their own stories about family conflicts. Her comments section looks like a support group for excluded parents. I walked to the living room window, observing the quiet Tuesday morning street. Harold was retrieving his newspaper from the front walk, moving carefully on icy pavement. Normal neighborhood life continuing while Raymond and Stephanie's world collapsed around their strategic miscalculation. Any legal threats materialized? They consulted with Morrison again yesterday afternoon, emerged looking even more defeated. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and everything you said was demonstrably accurate. Frank's professional assessment carried the confidence of someone who understood both law and media. 20 years of documentary work had taught him about boundaries and protections. They're running out of options, Walter. Pressure tactics failed, legal avenues closed, social media backfiring. I expect they'll try direct appeals next. Mutual friends? Probably, though most of your neighbors support your position after watching the broadcast. I returned to the kitchen, refreshing my coffee while processing these developments. The engineering mind that had calculated load-bearing requirements now assessed structural integrity of Raymond's desperate counterattack. Every support beam was failing under pressure. Frank, I appreciate you keeping me informed. Happy to help. This documentary represents some of my best work. Professional pride aside, you deserve respect from your family. Michael Davis called that afternoon with updates from the television station. His voice carried exhaustion mixed with professional determination. Walter, they've called 6 times today. Threats about legal action, complaints to the FCC, appeals to community decency, standard desperation tactics. Your response? Contract language is crystal clear. 3 broadcasts, non-negotiable. Besides, community response has been overwhelmingly positive. This documentary serves genuine public interest. Any pressure from higher authorities? Nothing credible. Small-town television operates differently than major networks. We're accountable to local community, not corporate shareholders. Michael paused, consulting what sounded like handwritten notes. Walter, between you and me, this broadcast represents exactly what local television should accomplish. Real stories about real people facing universal challenges. I'm proud to air it. The week progressed with increasing desperation from Raymond and Stephanie. Frank reported their attempts to recruit mutual acquaintances for mediation, their appeals to church leaders we'd known for decades, their growing social isolation as community sentiment solidified against them. Thursday brought the most pathetic attempt. Raymond's supervisor from work called, asking if family reconciliation might be possible. Professional reputation damage was spreading beyond social circles into career consequences. I declined to discuss family matters with strangers. Friday afternoon, Frank delivered the final intelligence report. They've given up, Walter. Saw them leaving Morrison's office this morning, looking completely defeated. Last legal consultation confirmed what everyone already knew. You have every right to tell your story. How did they appear? Broken. Raymond's lost weight. Stephanie looks exhausted. Word around town is they're fighting constantly, blaming each other for the situation. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only vindication that justice had been properly served. Actions carried consequences, and public humiliation deserved public response. Frank, what do you expect next? Direct apology. It's their only remaining option if they want any hope of restoring family relationships or community standing. Saturday evening brought the anticipated development. Harold knocked on my front door with information from his daily newspaper wrote, Walter, word is they're planning to visit you tomorrow, both of them together. Heard it from 3 different sources. Thank you for the warning, Harold. You've handled this perfectly, Walter. Ellen would be proud of your dignity throughout this entire situation. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. I prepared the house carefully, not with anticipation but with professional thoroughness. Important conversations required proper staging. By afternoon, everything was ready for the inevitable conclusion. Frank said they looked defeated. Tomorrow would bring the inevitable. Frank said they looked defeated. Tomorrow would bring the inevitable. January 2nd arrived with crystalline winter clarity, the kind of afternoon where bare tree branches etched sharp shadows across snow-covered lawns. I spent the morning reading in Ellen's chair, occasionally glancing toward the window that faced the street. At 3 o'clock, Raymond's car appeared at the curb. They sat inside for several minutes before emerging. Through the sheer curtains, I observed their body language, defeated postures, hesitant movements, the careful coordination of people preparing for surrender. The doorbell rang once, formally. I opened the door to find my son and daughter-in-law standing on the front porch, both dressed in their best clothes as if attending a funeral. Raymond's eyes met mine briefly before dropping to study his shoes. Dad, we came to apologize. Sit down, let's talk. I led them to the kitchen table where this conflict had crystallized 10 days earlier. The same chairs, the same afternoon light slanting through winter bare windows, but everything fundamentally changed. Coffee? Please, Stephanie answered quietly. I prepared 3 cups with deliberate ceremony, buying time for them to settle into the gravity of this moment. When I finally sat across from them, Raymond straightened his shoulders like a man accepting responsibility. We're ashamed of our behavior. The words carried weight I hadn't heard from him in years. Not deflection or justification, but simple acknowledgement. I'm not perfect either, but respect must be mutual. Stephanie leaned forward, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup. Walter, I influenced Raymond against you. I was wrong. Why? The question hung between us, requiring honest examination rather than polite evasion. Fear, she said finally. Fear that you'd control our decisions, our lives. I saw your involvement as interference rather than caring. And now? Now I understand the difference between a father's love and manipulation. Raymond took a shaky breath. Dad, excluding you from Christmas was cruel. Watching that documentary, Hearing our story told publicly made us realize how we must have looked to everyone. How do we fix this? The engineer in me appreciated his direct approach to problem solving. No more emotional deflection or strategic maneuvering, just practical focus on structural repair. Rules, I said simply. New rules that work for everyone. Over the next hour, we negotiated the framework for rebuilding our relationship. Regular communication without invasion of privacy. Automatic inclusion in family celebrations, unless circumstances genuinely prevented it. Honest discussion of problems before they escalated into public confrontation. I don't want to control your lives, I explained. I want to be part of them. We understand that now, Raymond said. The documentary helped us see your perspective. Stephanie nodded agreement. The community reaction showed us how wrong we were. People we respect told us directly that excluding you was inexcusable. Social consequences? Severe, Raymond admitted. Professional relationships damaged, social circles closed to us, even casual acquaintances expressing disappointment. We've learned that reputation takes years to build and moments to destroy. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only recognition that justice had been appropriately calibrated, public humiliation for public disrespect, community judgment for community violation. Your documentary will air twice more, Stephanie said. Are you willing to help us face that? By demonstrating that families can learn and grow? Yes. We spent another 30 minutes discussing practical arrangements. Sunday dinner the following week, with Walter as honored guest. Open communication about future holiday plans. Recognition of his rightful place in family decisions that affected him. As they prepared to leave, Raymond extended his hand across the table. Dad, I've learned that you're smarter and more strategic than I ever realized. I won't underestimate your intelligence again. And I've learned that love without respect becomes manipulation. I won't make that mistake again either. Stephanie stood, gathering her purse with movements that suggested genuine relief. Walter, thank you for forgiving us. We'll earn back your trust. Trust is built through consistent actions, not grand gestures. They left with concrete plans for family dinner and ongoing communication. I watched their car disappear down the winter street, then returned to Ellen's chair with a final cup of coffee. The grandfather clock chimed 4 times, marking the end of this particular battle in the ongoing campaign of family relationships. Outside, neighborhood lights began glowing in windows where other families navigated their own complex dynamics of love and independence. Ellen's photograph smiled from the mantelpiece, and I imagined her approval of today's resolution. Dignity maintained, justice achieved, family restored through strength rather than surrender. The documentary had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. Education about real family values through personal testimony. Sometimes the most effective lessons required public classroom settings rather than private conversations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as all relationships required ongoing maintenance and mutual respect. But tonight, I could rest in the satisfaction of problems solved through engineering principles, proper planning, strategic execution, and structural integrity tested under pressure, justice served, family restored, lesson learned. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.